although it's welcome that the leader, Al-Jabani, has been saying he is not going to be acting in that way, you've got to think about his followers as well, haven't you? Because there's a lot of people who will have been living in quite sort of dire, difficult circumstances, fighting for their lives for years and years, who may well not think we want to abandon our cherished beliefs.
Now, I know that you have a number of concerns, don't you, that the fall of Assad, however welcome that may be in itself, could unlock new security threats. Tell me about that.
2 points. Firstly, the background of HTS. So it derives from Al-Qaeda. The leader of HTS previously swore allegiance to the leader of Al-Qaeda. So that in itself, that background ideology of jihad and hostility is a worry if they take over an entire country. And I think on that point, although it's welcome that the leader, Al-Jabani, has been saying he is not going to be acting in that way, you've got to think about his followers as well, haven't you? Because there's a lot of people who will have been living in quite sort of dire, difficult circumstances, fighting for their lives for years and years, who may well not think we want to abandon our cherished beliefs. And the second point is, if you have any, I think what security people call ungoverned spaces or permissive areas where either HTS or other terrorists like Islamic State can start to operate. And that can be a worry for all sorts of reasons, because it can have an effect on the UK. And it could be, I mean, at its worst, a resurrection of the Caliphate of Islamic State. Now, one has to hope it doesn't happen, but that was a very, very bad thing, not just because of what Islamic State plotted, but also the fact it inspired people in the UK. You obviously don't want to have a resurrection of Islamic State. You don't want them to get their training camps up and running. You don't want them to dominate territory. And you don't want them to inspire people.
Sticking then with HTS, the rebel group, and with HTS's leader, Al-Jilani. At the moment, we see that HTS is on that list of proscribed terrorist organizations held by this country. Americans had a $10 million bounty on his head. When you hear the promises and the assurance that this man Al-Jilani is making, do you say, let's treat them with complete skepticism? Let us not make any policy in the light of what he may be saying. We just have to behave as if the threat is there, the threat is real, the threat needs to be confronted as and when it comes, and we should be ready in the meantime.
Well, it's quite hard to prove that someone has really changed their spots, isn't it? And they're not going to prove it by what they say. They're going to prove it, if at all, by what they do. So I think that a position of absolute skepticism is absolutely the right one at this time. And we always think back, don't we, to some of the promises that were made by the Taliban 2.0, that they were going to be better than the last lot, that they were going to honour women's education. I mean, it all turned out to be lies, didn't it? So you've got to wait and see what they really do. And you've got to wait and watch and see what they do over a period of months and months before you could even begin, I would have thought, to think about deprescription or anything of that nature.
And months and months. You envisage years before they're taken off the terror list.
Well, I think that's probably right, because look at their ideology, look at their use of force. They qualify as terrorists, so it's quite difficult to see why you'd want to deprescribe them. I mean, I should say, I've heard some people say, well, you need to deprescribe them so the British government can talk to them directly. I mean, that's just wrong. That's a red herring. The law doesn't prevent the government from speaking to them at all. And if needs be, I can explain that in detail. So it's not necessary to deprescribe them so the government can form, for example, some sort of loose or some security arrangement with them, if that's what the government wants to do.
Yeah, it is possible to talk while still designating them officially as a terrorist group. Now, you alluded to this. In the northeast of Syria, there are camps, aren't there, which contain Islamist extremists. Now, it is overseen by Kurds, and they're doing that with the support and the funding from America. You're worried they could certainly turn out to be a source of future danger, future terrorism.
Yeah, absolutely. Tens of thousands of people, not just from Europe, some from Europe, many from the region. I think you have to assume that they are battle-hardened and that they are fundamentalist and that they won't have de-radicalized in camps that are still controlled by Islamic State, effectively. Islamic State have sought and, in fact, have achieved some breakouts over the years, so they can see that as a source of a future caliphate. At the moment, fortunately, it's stable, and it's controlled by the Kurdish-linked SDF. But any instability there, whether it's because the Kurds are distracted by Turkish or Turkish-supported attacks on the area, or because HTS or some other terrorist group seeks to control it, would be a real problem. So loss of stability and breaking out from those groups would mean a lot of people who are strong Islamic State supporters could go and join the people who are already at liberty in that area and maybe try and recreate that awful caliphate that we saw in the 2010s.
Right. And when you talk about an awful caliphate, it could be independent, quite separate from any regime set up by Al-Jilani and the HTS.
Yeah, I mean, I think a really interesting question is to what extent they heed the lessons of Iraq. So as you remember, the de-Baathification process with Iraq meant that Iraq lost a lot of its infrastructure and its capacity. Now, there are two questions with this new Al-Jilani regime. First of all, what does it want to do? Does it want to allow other terrorists or extremists or jihadists to operate within its space, or is it going to take steps to stop that? And the second thing is, can it stop it? So one of the questions is going to be, will it have control of the military, of the police force, of the normal basics of the state? And we just got to wait and see what happens.
Yes, and we also have to wait and see what approach is actually taken by the incoming president of the United States, Donald Trump, when he comes into office in January. We know that he's minded to, I think he said, what happens in Syria is a matter for Syrians. There is an American presence in Syria, but a full withdrawal from Syria by America, you'd be worried about that, wouldn't you?
I think so. I mean, I'm just looking at what America has done the last few weeks. First of all, they warned Turkey and the Turkish-backed Syrian National Authority, National Army, and HTS not to go into the part of northeast Syria controlled by the Kurds, where all these camps are. That was no doubt to try and keep that regime as stable as possible, given who's imprisoned there. And the second thing is the Americans bombed the Islamic State individuals who are currently at liberty in that area. Now, maybe President Trump will decide doing nothing is the best option. But I mean, it seems to me there is a whole range of options that he could take. It sounds like he's not going to put any more American boots on the ground. Yeah. I don't know what he's going to do about withdrawing them. But obviously, thinking about the effect on the UK and potentially the effect on America, stability is probably better, isn't it, than chaos?
Yeah. I mean, just the last question on the degree of threat we're facing in this country today. And I realise it is difficult, verging on impossible, to quantify these things. But how does the level of threat we face now, in the light of this new situation and other factors too, how does it compare to past years in terms of level of danger, level of threat?
Well, I was looking at the recent statistics that came out today. Certainly there are more arrests for terrorism-related activity than 2017. Sorry, the most since 2017. 2017, as you remember, was the high point of a lot of terrorist attacks in the UK. So, I mean, there is quite a lot of activity. Some of that is to do with the pro-Gaza marches, so people being arrested for supporting Hamas. But there have also been quite a significant number of attack plots as well. So there is quite a lot of activity at the moment. I think that we look, don't we, to what happened with Afghanistan and this group Islamic State of Khorasan province. So that's a regional offshoot of Islamic State. And they're the ones who have been proven quite effective at what people call external attack planning operations. They did that attack recently on a theatre in Moscow. And what you've got to be worried about is Islamic State finding territory to operate and then being able to plot and then project their threat capability into countries such as the UK.